if you're happy. There we go. Perfect. Okay, great. So to introduce you to myself briefly, I am Emma from Disability Sports Coach, and I essentially run the communications of the charity. So today we are looking at everything to do with community in this panel, why community is key in the future of inclusive sport. And the reason why we decided to focus on this is there's a couple of strands to it, really. One of the elements is due to the adaptations that we made over the course of lockdowns and the learnings that we found from that process. So, as with many sports organisations, we had to kind of adapt to online delivery during lockdowns because we couldn't, of course, provide sport in person. And although this was a big challenge at first, we've actually found there to be some potential benefits to having that offering, because we were able to provide several sessions a week online, and we not only kind of fostered a more kind of cross London network among our members who were able to interact outside of their usual borough club. We also attracted new participants from all over the world, really, some in Morocco, some in the US. And so we're able to kind of share our inclusive sport with a much wider audience and really foster those connections with online challenges and social media and lots of other things. And we found this to be quite beneficial for our participants as well, because we found that, for example, 80% of them who responded to a survey said that they were more active once we'd started providing our online program versus beforehand in lockdown. And 75% of them said that they felt less isolated due to the programs that we offered. So that was really positive and something that we want to kind of explore a bit more. But it's not just online communities, it's also in-person communities. And that's something we've got almost a decade of experience in fostering and developing, so that we get disabled people really integrated into communities and meeting and really fostering those friendships and connections. So that's one reason. And the other reason would also be the recent National Disability Strategy launch. And we know that lots of different charities have their stances on this, and lots of organisations have come out with different responses. But one thing that we thought would focus on community. So that's enough of me and what we've been doing. What I'd like to do now is to kind of introduce you to our panelists. So we've got some panelists from some brilliant organisations across different sectors. So we have Helen Newbury from, they've introduced themselves briefly in a minute. We have David Maidment from the Peter Harrison Centre for Disability Sport at Loughborough University, and Sam Brewery from the new inclusive fitness app Accessercise. So we are going to focus on the importance of fostering a strong sense of community when creating inclusive sport programs that aim to engage disabled people in a sustainable way. And we're going to explore the various different ways of doing this from various perspectives, whether it's another sports organisation working in communities, or research perspective, or a kind of more commercial perspective. So I'll start with you, Helen. Do you mind introducing yourself and a little bit of what Activity Alliance do?
Sure, thanks, Emma. My name is Helen Newbury, so I work for the Activity Alliance, specifically as part of the programmes team. My role within the programmes team is workforce lead for our Get Out, Get Active programme, which I'll tell you a little bit about in a moment. But just briefly, Activity Alliance is a disability and physical activity charity, and our vision is fairness for disabled people in sport and activity. And we're working towards closing the gap between disabled people's level of inactivity and that of non-disabled people, which we call the fairness gap. So our aim really to try and close this gap is to embed inclusive practice into organisations and also change attitudes towards disabled people in sport and activity. Now, within Activity Alliance, we've got several strands to our organisation in terms of what we do and what we offer to support the sector. But as part of the programmes team, we've got the Get Out, Get Active programme, which is what I'm directly involved with, and sort of why Emma's asked me to come along today as well. So GOGA, just briefly to explain, was a program created in 2016 to engage the least active communities into physical activity. So by bringing disabled and non-disabled people together to be active in fun and inclusive ways. We're looking to improve, strengthen community spirit, increase confidence, and improve mental health. So it's not all just about putting on activities, expecting people to come and getting lots of numbers in. We really want to strengthen communities through this and also learn about what works and what doesn't work when it comes to engaging the least active. The programme is based on the Talk to Me principles, which were developed by Activity Alliance. And that's all about what disabled people have told us will encourage them to be more active. So we've tried to base the programme on these, and it does work. We are now in phase 2 of the programme, and we'll be running the programme until 2023. We're working with 21 localities across the UK, and they all have their own specific target audiences in their localities that they're trying to engage and work with to become more active. So that's just a bit of a brief explanation about Activity Alliance and also the Get Out, Get Active programme.
Fantastic, thank you, Helen. It's a brilliant programme that we can all learn a lot from, so we're excited to hear more about it. I'll move on now to David. David has a bit more of an very academic research background and has done a lot of work on disability sport and inclusion. So David, if you could tell us a little bit about what you do at Loughborough.
Sure, thanks Emma. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Perfect, brilliant. Yeah, I have unmuted myself because I have a tendency not to do that. I also apologise, I've got 2 monitors in front of me and I don't quite know which one to look at. So if I keep looking between each one, please forgive me. So hi everybody, I'm David Maidment. I'm a lecturer in psychology within the School of Sport, Exercise and Health Sciences. And as Emma mentioned, I'm a member of the Peter Harrison Centre for Disability Sport. And I'm also a member of Leading at Loughborough. Now, forgive me, I can never remember what the acronym is, but I've got it here in front of me. It's Loughborough Equality and Diversity and Inclusion Network Research Group. So as Emma mentioned, I'm an academic. I have a keen research interest, and my research mainly focuses on digital interventions in order to improve physical activity and also to reduce non-communicable disease risks. So these are diseases such as diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and dementia, for instance, specifically in adults with disabilities. Now, my background's been in hearing loss, a primarily sensory disability, but I've got a number of students, PhD students, also working with physical disabilities. So I've got students working with young adults and older adults with spinal cord injury, and I also have a student working with individuals that use wheelchairs, so specifically looking at wheelchair basketball as well. So I'm really interested in understanding, developing and evaluating programs, interventions that really get people who have a disability, whether that be sensory or physical, to kind of get involved in physical activity so they can reap the benefits, whether they be to their physical or mental health and well-being. And I did want to say, actually, Emma, I've just got a message from James, who was going to join us today. So I'll have a look to see what that is. I think he's had a few difficulties joining us, so hopefully he'll be able to join us. So this is James, a PhD student who I mentioned, who's looking at spinal cord injury. So bear with me 1 second.
Okay, no problem. If James would like to join, then I'm sure we can work that out.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, David. Oh, I see him in the waiting room. Let's admit him quickly and see if he... Maybe we'll circle back to James because it's a bit much to be put on the spot as soon as you join a call. So Sam is the, kind of co-founder, I think, of Accessercise App. So this is a brand new app which is focused on helping disabled people get active at home. There are so many apps for non-disabled people, but there aren't many for disabled people. So Sam, would you like to tell us a little bit about that and your background in general?
Yeah, sure. Afternoon, guys. My name's Sam. As Emma said, I'm co-founder of Accessercise. So I co-founded the app with Ali Jawad, who's a Paralympic athlete currently in Tokyo. Otherwise, he'd be here instead of me. And yeah, as was mentioned, it's the first ever fitness app specifically designed for the disabled community. And we were very keen from the start to have it that way. So Ali's big vision for the app was always, it's got to be first and foremost for the disabled community and impairment driven. So it's quite unique in a few ways. We've got 2 or 3 different functions within the app at the moment, and we're going to be expanding every month or so. And at the moment, we've got an exercise library, which is unique to each disability or each impairment. So you will see exercises that are research-based and evidence-driven, demonstrated by somebody that shares your impairment. So they've been a really good guiding force for us to make sure that the app is as tailored as possible to each specific impairment. And our vision is to have over 180 different impairments on the app over the next few years. And then in addition to that, the app has got a community centre, which helps those with impairments share ideas, share thoughts, share success that we go through, and generally just integrate into the communities a bit better. And then we've got an explore section, which outlines every fitness facility in the United Kingdom. And we've got our own unique rating scale, which in due course will file into the Activity Alliance and UK Active quality mark that's being developed. And that we really wanted to have to aid people that do want to go to the gym, if they want to go to the gym, to be able to identify their nearest accessible venues to make it easy for them to know where's good and where's bad. And then those venues that aren't quite so accessible, work with them to become more accessible and open up more opportunities for the disabled community, in a nutshell.
Fantastic. It sounds like it would be a complete game changer for the community, so that's brilliant.
Fingers crossed.
Okay, so in terms of the questions, we probably start quite simple, and I'm sure this is kind of something that we all are very aware of watching and listening, but it's important to kind of root ourselves in. Helen, from all of your experience working on the GOGA programme, which has been established for quite a while now, and Activity Alliance's work in general, what role do you think that sport and physical activity play in promoting the overall well-being of disabled people?
Well, quite frankly, it's huge, Emma. We know that there's many benefits for both disabled and non-disabled people to be active together, but we've done quite a lot of research as an organisation over the years with disabled people, with their supporters, and also with people who are delivering activity to disabled people. So we've got quite a range of information and research out there, which is telling us, you know, that disabled people do really value the importance of physical activity and the opportunity to take part in activity, and that it has huge benefits to their physical and mental well-being. More specifically, the sort of top reasons that we found through sort of our research is that they really appreciate the fact that it helps maintain physical health, helps manage conditions, but equally to feel good. And I think that is one of the main things that everybody can resonate, that being active, it does make you feel good. With the GOGA programme more specifically, obviously, one of the key principles of GOGA is that the activity should be fun and they should be what the audience and community want. And that's what we try and promote with GOGA, is we push localities to go and talk to the audience that they're trying to work with and understand what makes them feel good, what would be fun, and what activity looks like to them, and try and cater for that need, rather than putting on things that they think will be suitable, but it not necessarily cater. So, and a lot of it has been based upon fun. It's about the community spirit, it's the social cohesion and sort of coming together to be active. But just a bit of a summary from phase 1 of the programme, the well-being improvements that we saw for the very least active group that came through, all increases in life satisfaction, life worthwhile and happiness, decrease in anxiety, but I think quite importantly, more positive about the engagement with their local community and feel more able to engage in activities in that community. And I think on the flip side of that, by having disabled and non-disabled people being active together, what we found that actually really helped improve perceptions of disabled people from the non-disabled people, and 65% said they had a more positive view as a result of taking part with disabled people in the GOGA programme. So the benefits are huge and wide-ranging, and you know, our research time and time again, it does state that when we go out and ask disabled people, you know, 4 in 5 want to do more activity than they currently do. So there is an absolute need and appetite there, and people do want to do it. So it's how we can cater for that need appropriately and get those opportunities out there.
There's some fantastic findings there in terms of both the mental health and the kind of community cohesion, like you said. And that goes kind of both ways, as you've sort of indicated, in terms of really fostering integration and understanding, and not kind of leaving the disabled community as an isolated group. We also had a panel yesterday with 2 disabled influencers, and they really spoke about the kind of desire for more integrated community activities. So that kind of feedback is, like you said, so vital. And I suppose that leads into what Sam's been working on a little bit, Sam, because you spoke about the ability for users of the app to feed back to facilities and things like that. So what led you to kind of develop that side of things? Did you hear from your members' experiences and why they felt that physical activity is so important to them, and what kind of led you to that development?
Yeah, it was quite an interesting one for us. I think what initially led us there was the barrier to exercise for the disabled community. And I think we're all very understanding now across the globe that if you exercise, live a healthier life, you're going to feel better, you're going to be more productive and all those sorts of things. I think that's quite well known now. The issue then comes of how do you ensure that's possible for everybody, regardless of impairment or social status or whatever it might be. And we stripped it right back to what governs sport and exercise and healthy living, and 90% of the time it's government, and when you look at the government definition of what a accessible venue is, in our opinion, it's terrible, because you might have a ramp where a wheelchair user can access a venue, but if they can't use any equipment within the venue, then it's not an accessible venue. But as far as government are concerned, it is. So we wanted a tool which could collate as much data as possible and almost centralize all the great work that everyone in the industry is doing, put it into one place and be able to take that to the industry to help them develop and keep up with the change that's needed, but then also push government to change what an accessible venue is. What is equality, what is fairness to the disabled community, which is why we wanted the rating system and this feedback from the users, because real life, it's real time, that is often missed on a more governmental level, I guess.
Absolutely. That's actually something that came up recently at an event we attended, and a man with vision loss came up to us and kind of asked if we had any provision in terms of helping people to use gyms, because he said, I'd like to use the gym, but I can't use any of the equipment because it's not accessible for me. And of course, we can offer coaches to go along one-to-one, but not everyone wants that as an option. So some people would prefer to be able to, go to a gym that's already accessible to them. So it's brilliant that you're starting to develop that technology and process a bit more. And I suppose, again, that links to what David is doing in terms of looking at the psychology behind inclusion in sport and having those opportunities and real scope for engagement. So what would you say from your perspective, kind of researching communities?
Yeah, I'd say Helen and Sam have really summed it up really well. I don't really know what more I can say or add on, because it's excellent. We know that people with disabilities don't engage in enough sport or physical activity, unfortunately, and it's actually being able to provide those opportunities so that they can engage. I mean, one of the difficulties is that how do you get people engaged that are completely doing no physical activity whatsoever? That's the difficulty, because sometimes we can develop programs, we can develop interventions, and we only seem to recruit, particularly in research, for instance, those that are already interested or want to be active. So something that I'm really keen on targeting are those that aren't yet willing, aren't yet ready to engage. What can we do to kind of get those people to kind of move forward, even if it's just doing a small amount of physical activity, even if it's less than what would normally be recommended. And I really liked what Helen said about when designing programs, getting those people involved in development, but also getting them involved in kind of the evaluation and interpreting those findings. Obviously from the outside we can give that a go, but I think what's really critical is that these individuals with disabilities that are living with that disability are kind of engaged in all aspects of what we're doing, so that they can inform them and give their own unique perspectives. I think that's something that's really important, and we often call that kind of co-production or participatory approaches, which is just kind of a posh word for saying getting them involved in evaluation, in development. So I think that's probably the key thing to kind of getting something inclusive for all, is to kind of get all of those stakeholders involved. But unfortunately, it can be difficult.
Absolutely, and we'll come on to the kind of element of collaboration later in the chat. It's a very important one that you raised there. So again, to bring it a little bit back to basics, I'm sure everyone on the call know that generally speaking, findings state that disabled people are about half as likely to be active as non-disabled people. And of course, this is due to a wide range of structural barriers. But David, from your perspective, researching academically, but also very much on the ground, what do you think are those main structural barriers, and what would you like to see change? Do you think communities can be leveraged more to tackle those barriers?
Yeah, it's really difficult because there are lots of different layers of these barriers, right? There's the individual barrier, the barriers that are faced by the individual, and they could be things like, transportation, for instance, relying on somebody else in order to transport them to a venue, and that venue might be very far away. But that we might think of that as kind of an individual issue, but obviously it's got a much higher level, from, I think Sam was mentioning, from government and kind of national governing body perspectives as well, because should we be providing the transportation for those individuals? So that's kind of one barrier that has multiple layers, I think, that will all kind of need unpicking, because it's not a straightforward solution. But I think there are lots of different barriers, some more easy to address than others. And I know that James, who I think joined us, but he's got signal issues, unfortunately. He's on the move, so he might have had to dip out. But he did a recent study during COVID, actually, although it wasn't focused on COVID-19. And I know that you're going to mention that later on, Emma. But he did a study where he interviewed people with lots of different disabilities to see what kind of were the barriers, what kind of discouraged them, what were the facilitators, what encouraged people to engage in sport. And what we found was some really interesting findings. So as I mentioned, transportation came up as a key finding. Time, energy, motivation, all of these factors kind of contributed to whether they would or wouldn't engage in physical activity. And I think what we need to identify is kind of what are the key difficulties that are experienced by different subpopulations, because we can't create, I don't think, something that's going to cater for everybody. I'm not sure who mentioned it earlier, but I think you need to find something that maybe caters for a certain group, and there some aspects will kind of be suitable for others, whereas others may need a kind of a slightly different, more unique approach as well. So it's kind of unpacking that. I guess the gist of what I'm saying is that it's very, very, very complicated, and there isn't a straightforward answer, but maybe some of the other panelists might be able to kind of clarify or explain maybe what they've done in order to address that.
Yeah, it's all about those intersections, isn't it? And that's something that I think Helen touched on in terms of the multiple locations that GOGA works with and how each one is adapted. So how do you think, Helen, that those kind of barriers are best addressed in terms of specific different communities?
I think I agree with what David was saying. I think it is incredibly complex. And one thing, just before I talk about GOGA, that I wanted to highlight in terms of a major barrier that we've researched into as well is actually the benefit system, and the fear of losing benefits is preventing people from taking part in physical activity. So that is something, and through our research through COVID as well, that is still of genuine concern for people. But through GOGA, what we found is it's trying to reach people in a way that they trust and understand, and that might not always be the traditional route. And if you're trying to reach the least active, then you've got to think about what channels that they're using and accessing. We've had a really lovely example in Wiltshire at the moment. They're trying to work in isolated rural communities, and they've partnered up with a charity who does lots of on-the-ground community work. So they go out, they talk to people in the communities, they go to, I don't know, local knitting clubs or whatever it is, get out there, and they try and engage with those people and understand what their activity levels are, what it is that they would like to do, and then they go off and work with a physical activity provider, and they put on the activity that's been requested in the location that they've requested, because it's easy for them to get to. So I think it's about building that trust and understanding what the audience exactly need and reaching them in ways that work for them. Equally in Forest of Dean, another very rural community, working with people with dementia, for instance, and sort of doing very, very localized small walks with them to areas that they might be familiar with from their past, has worked incredibly well. And I think it's having that diversity of offer really helps to break down barriers and reach, you know, the diverse audience. One size doesn't fit all, and it's about that continued conversation and connection throughout, and where possible trying to co-produce and work with people that they trust as well to reach them. So it's not always about sort of providing activity through, you know, your typical sport and physical activity providers. It's sometimes community providers as well.
Absolutely, because there are so many options for non-disabled people in terms of routes into physical activity, and as much as sometimes those kind of sessions that offer the basics might be a good in point, we really need to proliferate those options in the same way in terms of inclusive sport. That's very true, and that's something that it seems like Accessercise is certainly aiming to do with 180 different impairment options. So Sam, did you want to speak a little bit about how you maybe feel that online platforms or technology could kind of intervene in this, and in terms of bringing different opportunities to people regardless of particularly their physical location, as it's a digital tool?
Yeah, sure. And I think what I always think what's super important when we're talking about the barriers to activity or healthy living is we're not trying to create this perfect environment in the world, and we can't ever get to that. You know, like there are people that don't have impairments that also struggle to access exercise and healthy living. I think so often, I think we try and strive for this perfection, which is often the wrong approach to it. You know, I think we should be trying to help as many people as possible and doing that in a very focused way. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the digital side, I think COVID really hit home and highlighted the massive gap in equality in that area. And it was amazing how quickly during the COVID lockdown that people like Joe Wicks became super famous and had a really good delivery online, and you know, all these yoga instructors suddenly were giving online classes and became really famous and millions of viewers. And the amount of content and material that was available to people without impairments almost overnight was huge, and there was just virtually nothing for the disabled community, and anything that was developed was always like quite specialized into like one impairment or another impairment, and that's what actually drove Ali and I to really accelerate Accessercise as fast as we could. Was that, you know, we wanted to create this wide platform for as many people as possible as quickly as possible to try and reduce or at least limit how wide that gap gets. You know, we're going to change the way I think we approach exercise and living for a long time with COVID. So we wanted to provide a platform that for those that wanted to go to the gym, provided gym-based activity. For those that wanted to stay at home or couldn't go to the gym, they could still have activity. And people that like just being outdoors, they could have activity as well. But yeah, I think COVID highlighted a massive change in terms of the rich getting richer, almost, in terms of the able-bodied community being almost fine and having a great time versus the disabled community having a tougher and tougher and tougher time.
Absolutely. It's something that I think probably across the board a lot of sports organizations experienced, and we did too. Of course, like many people told us that the online provision, our home activity program, was a lifesaver, many people said. However, when it got to the end of lockdowns and you speak to members at some of the in-person events, they're saying we want to go back to in-person as soon as we can. And it's important to have all those options. But what we found is that it's the friendships, it's the connections, it's the community that keeps people coming back week after week to make those sustainable well-being habits. So it's a really important one that you mentioned there. And seeing as we're talking about COVID, I suppose it would be we'd be remiss if we didn't kind of touch on that a little bit more. So Helen, I'm sure that you had to adapt Goga in some ways over lockdown. How did you find that COVID-19 affected your audience's kind of engagement in sport or participation in the programme in general?
Yeah, I mean, it was quite difficult launching a program called Get Out, Get Active when the national lockdown had just started. So that was a bit of a tricky one, but we persevered. And I have to say, well done to all the localities involved who found alternative ways to reach people and to keep them engaged. I think, one of our research papers that we conducted throughout COVID as Activity Alliance was that there was a real drop off of disabled people sort of not taking part in physical activity and things. And so that's why for Goga, it's really important that we did try and reach the audience in different ways. And it was things like, online activities was certainly one way, but it's obviously not for everybody. So they were putting sort of flyers in food parcels and reaching people through church and community groups and putting exercise leaflets in those, but also giving them an opportunity to get in touch with them online or access online content if that suited them. So there were, a few different adaptations. Some were able to do dog walks because I think at one point that was within the restrictions. So they were able to actually reach people face to face. It was difficult engaging some audiences because digital was just completely, it wasn't accessible for them. Some areas did manage to sort of get access to iPads and Wi-Fi to support that and give them a bit of training. But I think that's something that we learned as Goga went on, that actually a blended approach was very beneficial to the audience in terms of having an online offer, but making sure that there's something else there as well for people who don't access online activities. So that was a couple of ways that we did it, but they've persevered and they've kept people engaged and they've done a really good job. So yeah,
that's certainly true. I think it's something that it seems like government-based organisations are really responding to quite well since lockdown. For example, the Sport England Tackling Inequalities Fund that's come out since COVID came around. With us at least, they're kind of supporting us to send out equipment packs to those, like you say, those members of the disabled community that don't access digital as much for whatever reason. So yes, absolutely agree that the blended approach is very much important and one that hopefully we will see many more organisations kind of maintain going forwards. David, did you see any change in terms of your research projects or your qualitative work throughout or since?
Yeah,
COVID?
well, I'd say first of all, the whole delivery of research was very difficult. So everything, as we know, reverted online, very much like today, via Zoom calls or other video conferencing platforms. And unfortunately, many of the individuals that we work with or do research with have difficulties using that technology, whether it be accessing that technology or even just communicating using that technology. So you could imagine that, I think Sam was mentioning, Joe Wicks on YouTube videos, for instance, these kinds of things are great, but then people can't necessarily access them or they're not necessarily suitable to their needs. So yeah, we found it really difficult, not to say that it wasn't even more difficult for the individuals that we work with and do research with. I think one of the key things that we found was social isolation became a real problem. So even if people could go out one day, or 1 hour a day or whatever to do exercise, it was still very much alone or only with a small group or a small number of individuals. And I think that we've kind of mentioned it a few times during today's panel, that physical activity has physical benefits, but also that social element of engaging with other people is really critical, really important. And even if you're doing something together as a group and not necessarily communicating together, again, that has loads, huge benefits. That cohesion and working together as a group is really important. And I guess with COVID, there just wasn't that. And although that we can kind of find proxies, so we can do forums, say we can have group chats, we can do this video conferencing, unfortunately, even though it does help and it's better than nothing, it's still kind of not what I would call the gold standard of in-person kind of physical activity, because we're all tactile human beings. We like, most of us like to be, on the odd occasion with other people. And I just don't think that, we haven't found something that can kind of replicate that in this virtual world that we're currently living in. And something that I would also say is that although we've had a number of lockdowns and some things have, I wouldn't say have gone back to what they would typically be, but we are getting there in terms of introducing more in-person and kind of physical activity. There are still some aspects, so wheelchair basketball is a great example, for instance, that it's only been relatively recently, so within 4 weeks, say that's been able to get back up and running due to some of the logistical challenges, and also because these individuals are vulnerable. They're shielding and protecting themselves from COVID-19 as well. So it's absolutely necessary that they don't put themselves at risk. So it's just being aware that we're still not, although we're hopeful, and I don't want to sound all doom and gloom, I still don't think we're 100% there, which is really unfortunate. So I think we're going to see the kind of the difficulties that people have faced for some time, and it's going to take a while for us to kind of get back to pre-COVID levels, even if we do, it's so uncertain, isn't it?
Absolutely. So there's certainly a balance there between the in-person offering and the digital kind of tools that can be used to supplement that. Sam, what do you think? Do you think digital is a supplement, or do you think there's more potential in how we can leverage those digital tools in terms of empowering the disabled community through sport going forward? How do you think that the lockdown might have reframed that potential?
I think the world is always going to a more digital-based, technology-driven status, I guess. But I think what's most important, looking at it in terms of should digital outweigh in person or versa, it's entirely down to what's best for each individual. And I think the important thing as an industry is that we all make sure there's as much material about those that want to do online technology-driven exercise, make sure that there's accessible facilities for those that want to do in-person and physical activity, make sure that outdoor spaces are accessible for different impairment types and needs and equipment if people want to go and exercise outdoors. It's about removing barriers rather than segregating exercise into different areas, I guess. That's what I think is more important.
That's a very good point. And again, it kind of touches on what the influencers or bloggers we spoke to yesterday mentioned about integration between non-disabled and disabled participants. And I suppose there's a real conversation to be had about, are we kind of niching down on individual communities and demographics or even impairments, or are we trying to kind of create more of a cohesion? So Helen, do you have any kind of experience there? What did you find was the most useful? Did you have impairment specific kind of pathways, or was it more about just participation and tailoring for the specific participants that you had?
Yeah, I think it's all about individual need, really. With GOGA, it is a program about being active together. So it is very important that the opportunity isn't solely for disabled people or solely for non-disabled people. And I completely resonate with what Sam said earlier in terms of barriers exist for everyone, not just disabled people. And I think that's what we recognise through GOGA, that actually we've developed a lot of resources based on our research with disabled people, but when it comes to reaching the least active, a lot of our resources are applicable across, all groups. It's not just for disabled people. So I think what we find is the best approach with GOGA is actually talking to the communities, understanding through their trusted sources. So for example, in the Black country, they are working with faith leaders and faith groups to reach communities. They've got trusted people within the community that the faith groups really liaise with, and they've done all their consultation through that individual, because that's the way that they've been able to reach them and get an understanding and build that trust. Now, if a sports organisation had tried to do that, it just wouldn't have worked, it wouldn't have happened. So I think it's all about having the links into the community, finding the right people to talk to, and then developing the offer based on the need. And for us, it's about participation, it's about being active, having fun, and whatever active looks like for that individual. It could just be stepping outside their front door, whereas for others it could be going to a session, then developing, then becoming a volunteer, then becoming a leader. And everyone's journey is very different, and I think that's what Goga tries to appreciate, and to base everything on having fun as well. Having fun and always making sure there's a social side with tea and cake.
Always important, always important. David or Sam, is there anything that you'd like to add in that sense of, whether we're niching down on particular demographics or whether, or I'm sure there's space for both, but from your experience, what have you seen the results of those approaches being?
I would say that for me personally, when evaluating or developing anything, tailoring is almost the holy grail. Being able to tailor to an individual's needs feels almost impossible, but what we want to achieve. And I guess again, in order for us to meet that, again, developing with the target group that we're aiming at is really important. So getting their perspectives and working with them as closely as possible. But I think you're right, Emma. I think there's probably room for both, and I think there's value in both approaches. And also just echo what Helen said with regard to involving people with and without disability is really, really important, I think. Especially given the findings from Activity Alliance, is also really important.
Fantastic. And Sam, I don't know if you want to touch on that, but I would also like to ask you.
Oh, sorry, I just lost you at the end of that, Emma.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, carry on with what you were saying.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, I think I go sort of both David and Helen. I think that obviously the pinnacle would be to tailor everything that we do in the industry to every single individual, but we're also not naive enough to think that's remotely possible. What I think we can do is give a tailored service or product, or remove barriers for tailored individuals in a clever way, like working with the industry to not necessarily group impairments together, but find creative ways that we can support multiple impairments at the same time through one initiative. And that's the way to make it cost effective industry, take to the end user, and help as many people as possible. I think that's to it for sure.
Certainly with the app, it sounds like that would be very useful, because like you said, you want to see the activities demonstrated by someone that has a similar impairment to yourself if you're going to work out how to adapt it. So yeah, it certainly sounds like there's a real need for that. And seeing as you're so close to the Paralympics because you're working with Ali, I'll kind of lead with you on this question. How do you feel the potential of the Paralympics to shift narratives or kind of raise awareness of the importance of inclusion is being used? Do you think it's being fully utilised? Do you think there are particular ways we should be keeping the momentum going at this point?
Yeah, I think the Paralympics is an amazing event that really showcases how incredible some people can be, just like the Olympic Games showcases how incredible some people can be. What I think we need to be wary of as an industry is that the Paralympics is once every 4 years, and it shouldn't be a case of impairments in the disability community being in the limelight for 6 months every 4 years. We have to have social and real change driven on a daily, weekly and monthly business for the next decade or more. And I think sometimes we get too focused in that, it's the Paralympics, like how can we use this to drive this and that, and actually it shouldn't matter too much. We should be driving these changes regardless of where we are in the Paralympic cycle. And participation's been talked about a lot, and it's probably 1% of the disabled community go to the Paralympics. And that should not be what drives us. What drives us should be getting millions more people active that don't want to go to the Paralympics. I've got no vision today. We want them to just live a healthier life. That's all we're trying to achieve. And that was something that Ali as a Paralympian has been very keen on from the start of Accessercise. It's a participation app. It's not for elite training. It's not about anything that, because that's not what we need. We need growth from the ground up.
Absolutely. And Helen, I'm not sure if I saw this on some Activity Alliance research, or potentially it was another organisation, but there were some findings that were saying that every pound invested in community grassroots sport creates, I think, £3 of economic benefit and social benefit to the country in general. So from various different perspectives, there are benefits to doing this, whether it's for the most important reason, of course, people themselves, but also society at large. Do you think, have you seen any kind of motivation from the Paralympics in the members of Goga, or do you think there are ways that we could be doing more to maintain this momentum throughout every year, like Sam said?
To be honest, I think Sam summed it up perfectly in everything that he said. You know, it's every 4 years, but actually we've got to be working to be changing attitudes all the time and closing the fairness gap in terms of just getting more people active in more general. It shouldn't just be a focus every 4 years. And we don't really see much traction from the Paralympics in terms of motivating people necessarily to be active. I think what would be more motivating to people would be actually just to have the wealth of opportunities available to them and accessible to them, and to hear about them. And that's what we should really be focusing on, is, are we providing inclusive opportunities? Are they accessible? Are they being advertised in the right way, so that it does give people the opportunity to be active when they want to be active? So I think that would be the focus. And, you know, from our research, no, the Paralympics isn't sort of one of the main motivators for people to be active. So yeah, I completely agree with what Sam said, and I don't think there's much more than that I could add to that, really, because he summed it up so well.
Absolutely. Like you've both said, it's an opportunity for representation, but it's a very small section of the disabled community who are being represented. So it's really important that we kind of encourage the media and the sector to be representing everyone all of the time. David, do you have anything to add in that sense on the impact of the Paralympics? I know Loughborough is a university with a very strong sports department, so you kind of do have those pathways, whereas certainly Disability Sports Coach and Activity Alliance are much more focused on participation. Do you see there as being a difference in the approach there, or is it the same fundamentals, regardless of whether you want to go towards a competitive or just enjoy sport?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly Loughborough are making efforts more, you know, obviously we're very well known for elite sport, but we are making efforts to be more inclusive. So we've got lots of initiatives going on. In fact, we're probably one of the only institutions in higher education, sorry if I'm blowing our trumpet here, that has its own parasport strategy. So Nick Diber, who's head of parasport, has been really integral in setting up that mission for parasport. But unfortunately, when people think of parasport, they immediately think of the elite parasport athletes, but actually that initiative really aims you know, to be inclusive and equal. So I know Sam was mentioning about perfection. I think what we should be aiming for is equality and inclusion at all levels, you know, from grassroots all the way to elite sport. And something that I would say is that with the Paralympic kind of momentum, and also just from the Olympics, you know, when we look at the legacy there, certainly in terms of physical activity, we see kind of an increase during the events and slightly after, but it tapers off. And, you know, the momentum slows, unfortunately. And it's a shame that James couldn't be with us, because he's actually a member of the Parasport Student Committee, and he does marketing. And something that he's really striving for is to increase imagery of people that are being physically active that live with a disability around the campus. And that reminds me of something. So I've got 4 children of varying ages, from 2 to 13. And my 8-year-old was in the car with me, and we saw an advert for the Paralympics, and it was one of our GB swimmers. And it's just struck up a conversation between us. And I thought that was really great. You know, having that billboard provides an opportunity for us all to have those kinds of discussions with each other, whether they be family and friends. So I think just by increasing imagery in the media more regularly, not just every kind of 4 or 3 years, but kind of, you know, so it's just always there, it's always apparent, online. I think that certainly is something that we can help and certainly strive for. And like I said, at Loughborough, it's something that, you know, we've developed committees that will push that agenda forward, and I hope that will kind of be kind of copied across the UK and even internationally, maybe.
Yeah, that would be so brilliant to see. Yeah, it's great. It's great to hear that universities and institutions are kind of focusing on that. So I think in a moment we'll take some questions. I know it looks like we've got some, but before that, I'd just like to give each of the panelists an opportunity to share any recommendations they might have on programs or projects or training or content or communities or anything you would like to plug, essentially. So I'll start with Helen. Is there anything you'd like to share with the audience at all?
All I would say is if you're not familiar with our work, then I'd encourage you to have a look at our website, because we've got lots of resources on there for the physical activity sector and also wider community and health as well. So I'd recommend taking a look at our resource section and also our research as well. And if you want to find out more about GOGA and the localities involved, check out the GOGA website. As I say, there's 21 localities across the UK. And we'll be updating that website with learning to share across the sector as well. So keep your eyes on that one too.
Fantastic, lots to look at. Thank you, Helen. David, is there anything that you'd like to share?
I was just going to say to anybody that's on the call, please do get in touch with me if you're interested in being involved in any of our work. What I did want to do is just post in the chat, if that's all right, Emma, just a link to the Peter Harrison Centre, which has everyone's details in there. So if you're interested in any of the work that we're doing, you can look at that, and that kind of spans all of the, like I said, from grassroots all the way to elite level. So whatever you're interested, I'm sure there's something in there, and there's contact details of all of my colleagues as well as myself who are doing work in this area.
Great, thank you for doing that. I'll also add in URLs for Activity Alliance and for Accessercise App on this call, so that you can find everyone basically. So Sam, I'm guessing the main thing you'd like to suggest is that people check out the app, but is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Yeah, not really too much. Yeah, like you said, it'd be great if everyone could just download and use the app. But fundamentally, same as Dave, like we want to hear from you, and it's very much an app for the community. So any feedback, thoughts, or comments, or what you want to see next, very much please just email us, get in touch, and we'll implement it as fast as we can.
Fantastic. So I'm just adding the links now. So I saw during the chat that we had a hand up from Angela. Did you have a question, Angela, that you'd like to ask if you wanted to unmute or type it in the chat or anything?
It wasn't so much of a question, it was just when Helen was speaking, I was just so excited to be able to let you know that I'm a disability sport officer down in Pembrokeshire, so funded by Disability Sport Wales, and we were fortunate to be one of the localities that had a GOGA officer in the first phase. And they worked specifically in Pembrokeshire with the age 60 to 25. And so that investment, like what Helen spoke about, having that resource to be able to go out and amongst the community, speak to people, find out what they wanted, was such a massive asset. And, there's projects that have become sustainable from that. And we're now also part of a regional project, GOGA Phase 2. And this is specifically working with elective home educated children, which was part of our Phase 1 project. So, it's just reiterating lots of what Helen spoke about, because it's a massive asset. And I'm really excited about Sam as well, because the Accessercise app is something that we thought about working on down here in Pembrokeshire, so I'll definitely be in touch with him about that.
Perfect, thank you.
So great to hear. We've also had a comment in the chat from Ipidna saying, very proud of being a former Sydney Paralympian, just in case anyone can't or hasn't seen this, in para-powerlifting and helping a PhD student, and now working for Disability Sport Wales. Would be very interested in working with David and Sam, shared the email address there, so if anyone needs to access those things, I can send them across afterwards. I can see another message. Is this a question? Oh, from me. Has anyone got any other questions that they'd like to ask our panelists? Feel free just to unmute and ask away, or type in the comment section.
I have one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was raising my hand, actually, physically.
Sorry, I couldn't see you.
Yeah, my question is for Sam about the kind of platform of the app. If it's going to be also kind of online in another format for people that might not have smartphones or need it as well, like in larger screens.
Yes, yeah, definitely. So we're going to replicate the entire app on a online web-based platform as well, and the idea being exactly like you say, is people could have it straight on their smart TVs or on a computer or anything like that. So yes, so at the moment you can screen share with the bigger screen if you need to, but yeah, you're right, for those that haven't got smartphones or haven't got access to that technology, then yeah, we'll have it online as well.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
Great, thanks, Emma. Any other questions?
Just one more for Sam.
Oh, God.
Sam, you mentioned about with your community section of your app that you'll be able to link to opportunities. How would a club or an organisation be able to get onto it? Is it by going onto the app?
So the community section within the app is it's essentially a bit like a Facebook wall. So it's more for sharing an individual's exercise, workout ideas, thoughts, and then there's a group section where, pardon me, where at the moment we've got groups based on impairments, where you can join and sort of socialize and share ideas. What our next step will be is working with partners such as yourself and maybe creating a group specifically for you that members can join and integrate with each other, and then also linking you into our social media team and letting them sort of cross-reference what you're doing and cross-promote. And from day one, we've always said that, you know, we want this app to fit within the community. You know, we want to work with all of our partners and not replace anything, not do anything differently, you know, but support all of the great work that's already being done. So yeah, just get in touch with us and we'll link into social media and link into the app and as much as we can, and just work with you for whatever you're trying to achieve as an organisation.
That's great.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions at all? No, I'll just give the panelists a chance to mention anything that they might have suddenly thought of that they'd like to mention, or are we all happy?
I'm always happy.
Okay, great. So in that case, I'd like to say a huge thank you to Sam, David and Helen for joining us. It's been so fantastic to hear your insights. And yeah, we look forward to seeing everything that you do in the future. And if any of our participants would like to find out more, there's plenty of information in the comments section. And if not, you can send me a direct message on here and I will email things across to you. Thank you everyone for tuning in and for your questions. It's been brilliant to hear from you all, and hopefully we can use this as a moment to continue championing the cause of communities. Thank you so much. And as you can see, we've shared a little screen there in case anyone would like to donate to our work. The information is on the screen. As you know, we're a charity and it's always helpful in allowing us to reach more disabled people. And if we could go to the next slide, our next session is at 4. It's more aimed towards members and other disabled participants who might like to get involved. It is multi-sports at 4 p.m. So if anyone is interested in joining or even just seeing how we kind of work our online sessions, then you can do so at 4 p.m. on the same Zoom link. And thank you all again so much for joining us.
If you'd like to join the session, bring a ball or a pair of socks as well. Just FYI.
Yeah, there's the info.
Thanks.
Yeah, always helpful. So yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you so much to our panelists again and for everyone for joining. We'll end this call in 30 seconds, just to give you all a bit of warning.
Cheers, guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Hey, did that cut off?
Did what cut off?
Okay, because I just dropped off.
Oh,
But
okay. No, I think it's fine. I was saying bye anyway, so if it did, then it was smooth enough.
Okay, great. That was a really good session.
Thank you so much for the help. I think actually it was okay, considering